Happy Monday. What's up, everybody? My name is Tucker, and in the first video of the day, we're going to be talking about the Portland Trailblazers. Not exactly the most uplifting topic to begin our week with, but I feel like it's where we need to start. Portland has been struggling as of late, and there's just a lot of question marks around this team right now as it relates to the future of Terry Stotts as the head coach of this group, as it relates to their viability as a true threat in the playoffs, as it relates to Damian Lillard's future with the team. If you want to get especially dramatic, that's what we're going to be talking about in the first video of the day. But really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload twice a day, every single day in this channel. It's a great place for the most consistent NBA content on YouTube. If you're new here, by the way, what's up? My name is Tucker. You can also leave a like rating on the videos as well, and you can check me out at various socials and a Linktree link down in the description below to hang out with me outside of these videos. And with those things said, let's talk about the Blazers. So, this is a team that's been pretty steady for most of the year. You know what I mean? We've gotten accustomed to the Blazers being right outside of that top five in the Western Conference. That top five prior to the Jamal Murray injury being the Nuggets, Clippers, Jazz, Suns, and Lakers, right? And there's been, some movement within that five. Clippers playing better at certain points. The Lakers, of course, with injury issues. Now the Jamal Murray injury, where that puts Denver, not necessarily in terms of record, but in terms of, playoff viability. Portland's kind of been always right outside that. It's been them and it's been Dallas kind of jockeying for like that 6 and 7 seed, right? Well, the Trailblazers have lost 5 in a row. They're 2-9 in their last 11 games, and they have now fallen into a play-in game spot down at the 7th seed, with Dallas moving up to the 6th seed. And as much as Portland has done a good job this season of dealing with adverse circumstances, specifically from an injury perspective, they've dealt with guys missing time, TJ McCollum, Yusuf Nurkic. And every single time someone has stepped up, and a lot of times that player has been Damian Lillard. Every team deals with injury stuff, but it feels like every year Portland has some kind of significant injury. Zach Collins misses like the entire season, right? Or Yusuf Nurkic last year breaking his leg, or whatever the case may be. But they were able to kind of steady the ship, and Damian Lillard stepped up time after time after time. But now, in April, it's been a real struggle for this team and for Dame specifically. His numbers are down across the board. The shooting percentage stuff does not look great, and it's very typical of a stat line of you see of a guy that is, one, potentially a bit burned out, worn out a little bit as we get later on in the season, and two, dealing with some nagging injuries, whether it be his hamstring, whatever the case may be. Dame clearly is not 100%, although I wouldn't imagine that many players are 100% at this point in the season, especially given the condensed schedule. And typically in this scenario, you'd see a team like Portland start to prioritize a bit of rest for Damian Lillard to make sure that he is 100% right by the time you get to the postseason. But with the way they've been playing lately, that's not really an option. They need to, lock it in and figure it out if they're going to not only make the postseason in a real postseason spot rather than a play-in game spot, but then be a true threat once they get there. And so there are certainly a lot of concerns here for Portland. Primarily, those concerns exist on the defensive end of the floor. We knew coming into the season, as we've known for the last couple of seasons for Portland, that just from a personnel standpoint, defense was not going to be a strong suit for them. They made moves to try and improve that. We kept bringing in guys like Robert Covington, bringing in guys like Norman Powell. And it hasn't really made much of an impact. They're the second to last defensive team in the league in terms of defensive rating. Their offense has been really good, 6th in offense throughout the entire season in terms of offensive rating, but as of late, that's been slipping a little bit, again, with the Dame injury issue stuff. And if their offense slips even a little bit, they're not going to have a very good chance to win many of these games because of their defensive issues. And now comes the part that I'm sure any Portland fan that's watching this is thinking, when are we going to get to this part, Tuck? Here it is. Terry Stotts is the head coach of the Portland Trailblazers. I, in the past, have advocated might not be the correct word, but I've kind of defended Terry Stotts in terms of him keeping his position as head coach there in Portland. I think year after year, you can go and look and pinpoint a spot where things kind of went sideways for this group, and almost every single time it was as a result of a major injury to someone within the rotation of this group, and that's just such a difficult thing to overcome. This is a team that made the conference finals under Terry Stotts. It feels like year after year their guys get better, and I just wasn't sure that there were a ton of really good options out there to replace him with. But at this point, I'm willing to admit that the ceiling of this group is certainly limited, whether that be by Stotts as coach, whether that be by the personnel, whatever the case may be. And if you just want to try and make a move to shake things up, as a lot of people are advocating for right now, I could easily see a path in which this ends up becoming the last season with Terry Stotts as head coach in Portland. Now, this is a franchise that typically errs on the side of stabilizing things, right? Keeping a head coach maybe a year or two longer than they should. Keeping together a roster that in some cases for some franchises could have potentially been blown up to try and raise their ceiling. Portland year after year has been okay with being a playoff threatening team rather than a championship threatening team. And with that mindset, it's possible that they're just going to run this back the exact same way next year. And I would err much more on that side than I would anything crazy dramatic for Portland, right? Dame has made plenty of comments in the past about how he wants to stay in Portland. He wants to build a championship contender there. He doesn't want to leave and go play with these other guys. And I believe him. I think that's 100% a genuine statement from Dame. It's hard for me to imagine a scenario in which he goes back on that and starts asking, to potentially be traded or something like that. Unless things got really, really bad, it's difficult for me to imagine and envision that scenario, which is unfortunate because there's not really a path right now towards creating a really fantastic team in Portland. They've got a nice floor. Like Nurkic is a good player when fully healthy. He can certainly be an underrated big, and at times he's been overrated as well. He's kind of, jump back and forth between that. CJ McCollum's an awesome player. Damian Lillard is a fantastic Hall of Fame level guy. They just have never been able to find the correct pieces around those guys that can guard and can shoot and take a little bit of the pressure off the primary playmakers when they really need them to. And it's just never really worked out. And I think we're seeing that come to fruition once again here in Portland, where when everything is going correctly, Portland looks like a scary team with the shot making of CJ McCollum and the shot making of Damian Lillard. And we saw that when they made the conference finals a couple of years ago, right? And they've made some postseason series interesting for sure. But when things aren't going right or one thing starts to fall apart, they're just on such thin ice because they do rely so much on the backcourt brilliance of those two players. And, they're just not going to be able to guard on the level that you need them to. So the other guys on the lineup and other guys on the roster need to be able to make up for that. And they quite simply have not been able to do that. Now, again, if you want to blame Terry Stotts and the coaching for some of those things, I think that's fair. Even though they don't have fantastic personnel as it relates to defense, you could certainly make the argument that they should not be the second worst defensive team in the entire league. And I'm sure a lot of that would fall on Stotts, in the minds of most Portland fans. And even the offense, despite the fact that they're sixth in offense, especially lately, like if Dame really doesn't have it going like he has over the last 10 or 11 games, like I said in April, there's just not a lot of creativity here. It's very stagnant. They're very used to like a your turn, my turn thing between CJ and Dame. And again, that's another thing that, fan bases kind of rise up against and say, hey, there's no creativity within our offense. We're not giving very much effort defensively. There's some schematic issues defensively. Some changes here need to be made. So ultimately, here's where I'm at with Portland. Coming into the season, it was very unlikely we were going to see anything crazy different from this group. They were going to end up somewhere between the 4th and the 8th seed, maybe win a postseason series, more than likely not be a contender, to make the Eastern Conference Finals. And they were potentially going to have some improvements defensively with some of the guys that they brought in, but there wasn't a huge ceiling to this group. It wasn't like there's a Michael Porter Jr. waiting in the wings to kind of grow and develop and really raise the ceiling. And so ultimately, this kind of season is not necessarily surprising for a group that we kind of assumed would kind of get here. However, that doesn't mean that it won't end up resulting in some significant changes for this team in the offseason. I don't think they're going to trade CJ. I don't think they're going to trade Dame. This is a franchise and an organization that prides itself on stability and a fan base that is really closely connected with CJ and with Dame. And at any point over the last couple of years, if I even hint at the idea that one of those guys is going to get traded, more than any other fan base, Portland rises up and they say, no, that's not what we're going to do. The entire fan base would riot. The owners would be in so much peril if they ended up trading one of those guys. So I don't think that's what's going to happen. They can continue to try and make moves around the edges, but ultimately it's going to be the same old Portland year after year. And really the only major change they could make, and one that I would expect them to make, no matter what happens within the rest of the season, at least amongst all the likely outcomes, would be that Terry Stotts is no longer going to be the head coach of Portland. I think this is an organization that sees itself as one that should be better, than the 7th, the 8th seed. They did not expect to be a play-in team coming into the year. And if you're not going to make changes to the roster at the most significant points, then the only other place really to go is in that head coaching spot. I don't know who they would potentially look at to replace him, but I do think ultimately Terry Stotts is probably coaching his last handful of games with Portland, depending on how far they go in the postseason and things like that. This is not a team I'm necessarily afraid of when we get to the playoffs, especially with the way Dame's playing and the fact that he's not really going to get the opportunity to get healthy before the postseason as well. If I'm one of those teams at the top of the West, I'm kind of seeking out Portland right now because I know I can score on them, and if they have an off shooting night, they could very easily get swept out of the first round. So that's kind of where I'm at on Portland. Let me know down in the comment section below if you're a Blazers fan, if you just kind of have big opinions about Portland. Let me know where you're at with this team, as they are certainly in trouble at the moment. And yeah, that is going to be the end of the first video of the day, and I thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. You can also leave a like rating of the videos as well, and check me out at various socials, and a link tree link down in the description below. With all those things said, hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your Monday, and I will see you all next time.